All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling the division of the Promised Land. You know how it got split up among the 12 tribes of Israel.
Always a fascinating topic.
Yeah, we've got these excerpts you sent over from the book of Joshua, chapters 13 through 15. And let me tell you, it's more than just drawing lines on a map.
Oh, absolutely.
This is like high stakes real estate, ancient style.
Yeah.
We're talking political maneuvering, battles, some real surprises.
You got it. It gets complicated. It really sheds light on just how tough it was to establish a nation, especially in a land that's already inhabited.
Right, because even after entering the Promised Land, it seems like there were still big areas that weren't conquered.
Right.
Like moving into a new place, but only getting half the rooms.
Exactly. And it's important to remember these weren't just any areas. We're talking strategically important locations, like the Philistine cities.
Ah, the Philistines.
Yeah, they controlled the coast, which meant they basically had a lock on trade.
Yeah.
And access to the Mediterranean. These guys were not messing around.
Powerful bunch.
Organized under 5 governors even: the Gazite, Ashdodite, Ashkelonite, Gittite, and Ekronite.
Wow, that's a mouthful. 5 governors.
Each one controlling their own territory. A real force to be reckoned with.
Almost like those ancient Greek city-states. Each with their own ruler and agenda.
Yeah, good comparison.
But they weren't the only ones, right?
Yeah.
There's also mention of the Geshurites and Maacathites.
Right, and what's interesting about those groups is they weren't completely driven out. So they ended up living among the Israelites. Imagine that.
Talk about culture clash.
Right. You have to wonder, what were those interactions like? Did they blend their cultures? Did they live peacefully? Or was it constant conflict? It adds a whole other layer to the story.
It makes you wonder if that played a role in the conflicts that came later for Israel.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. What about those tribes who settled east of the Jordan River? Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh.
Right, east of the Jordan.
Seems interesting they chose to settle outside Canaan proper.
Well, it was strategic. Remember these tribes? They were big on livestock.
All right, the herds and flocks.
Exactly. So the land east of the Jordan, prime real estate for them, wide open spaces, like choosing a ranch over a city apartment.
Made sense for their lifestyle.
Absolutely. Plus, controlling that area gave them a buffer zone, against enemies coming from the east. And they had control of important trade routes.
So practical and secure.
Very much so.
Oh, and you can't forget the part about Balaam,
Oh, yeah.
the diviner.
Killed by the Israelites. Even his prophecies couldn't save him from that land grab. Shows just how intense things were.
Definitely. Speaking of intense, we got to talk about Caleb. This guy was 85 years old and ready to go.
Unbelievable. 85. Talk about commitment.
Like saying, retirement, no way, I'm just getting started.
Right. And his story, it really speaks to the whole idea of faith and reward that runs through the book of Joshua.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember, he was one of the original spies sent into Canaan 45 years earlier.
Wow, 45 years.
And while the other spies were freaking out about the giants and fortified cities, Caleb was like, bring it on.
Fearless.
He declared, with God's help, they could conquer the land. No problem. That unwavering faith, it earned him a place in history.
And a pretty nice piece of land too, right? Hebron. What's the significance of that city?
Oh, Hebron was prime real estate, a gateway to the hill country. Plus, it had all that history going back to the patriarchs. And, it later became King David's first capital.
It's a real prize.
Definitely. But there's another detail that makes Caleb's story even more interesting. His daughter, Aksa.
Aksa.
She wasn't content with just inheriting land. She knew that real power came from controlling resources.
Smart lady.
Especially in that region, water was everything. So she goes to her father and asks for springs of water as part of her dowry.
Bold move.
It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes. This woman was intelligent, strategic, thinking long-term.
She was way ahead of the game. Land is one thing, but water is life, especially in that environment. Okay, so we've talked about the unconquered territories, the strategic settlements east of the Jordan, Caleb and his bold claim. Now, let's get to the main event, Judah's inheritance. This is where things get really interesting.
You said it. Judah received a massive portion of land, stretching all the way from the Dead Sea to the Mediterranean coast. They weren't just given a slice, they got the whole pie.
Like winning the lottery.
It really was. And the text, It goes into great detail, listing city after city. It gives you a real sense of the scale of their holdings, the diversity too.
So they had fertile land for agriculture, they controlled trade routes, they even had coastline.
All of it. This wasn't just about survival. This was about establishing dominance in the region.
Wow, you'd think managing all that would be a challenge.
Oh, it was. And that's actually something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. But I'll leave you with this little tidbit. Even with all that land, there was one crucial piece that remained outside of their grasp: Jerusalem.
Wait, you're telling me the city that became the heart of Israel wasn't even fully under their control at this point? What happened?
Well, that's a story for our next deep dive. Stay tuned. So back to Judah and their inheritance. Before we get to Jerusalem, I think it's important to really grasp the challenge they faced. Imagine inheriting this massive territory,
Huge.
a mix of different people, different landscapes, different resources. It's a recipe for a lot of potential headaches.
Definitely a mixed bag. Like
Yours-
suddenly becoming the CEO of some giant company.
Yeah,
You got the corner office, but can you actually manage everything? So how do they even begin to tackle this?
Well, the text gives us some clues. Remember those long lists of cities and towns?
Yeah, kind of tedious at first glance.
It's easy to skim over them, but they're actually pretty important. It's like they're saying, look at all this, look what we've got.
A bit of bragging, maybe.
Maybe a little, but it's more than that. They're highlighting the vastness of Judah's territory, the sheer diversity. And that was a challenge in itself.
Okay, so how is diversity a challenge?
Think about it. You've got coastal plains, perfect for farming. Then you've got rugged hills, ideal for defense. You've even got stretches of wilderness.
Each one needing a different approach, right?
Exactly. You couldn't just use a one-size-fits-all strategy. It wasn't that simple.
So it's not just about conquering and dividing the land. It's about managing it all effectively.
Right. You need adaptability, administrative skills. You have to think about long-term sustainability, not just short-term gains.
It's like having a garden with all sorts of different plants.
Perfect analogy.
You can't treat them all the same way. Each one needs its own specific care.
Exactly. So are there any places within Judah's territory that really highlight these challenges?
Good question.
Well, the text makes a distinction between cities in the lowlands, like Eshtaol and Zorah, and those in the hill country, like Debir and Hebron.
Different environments, different needs.
The lowlands, with their fertile soil and access to trade routes, were probably the economic powerhouses.
Makes sense.
While the hill country cities, with their strategic locations, served as defensive strongholds.
So a bit of balance there. But we know that Jerusalem, which later became so central, was still outside of Judah's control. Why is that so important?
It's a huge detail. The fact that the Jebusites held onto Jerusalem right in the heart of Judah's territory, it shows the limits of their power.
So the conquest wasn't as straightforward as we might think.
Not at all. It's a reminder that things were messy, complicated. It wasn't just a clean sweep.
And it probably created some tension.
Oh, absolutely. This unresolved issue with the Jebusites, it's like a ticking time bomb, a seed of future conflict waiting to sprout.
So even though we're talking about land division, it's really about something much bigger.
You got it.
Nation building, creating a unified society,
Yeah.
all in this diverse and contested land.
Exactly. And as we go further, we'll see how these challenges play out, shaping Israel's destiny in some really significant ways.
It's fascinating stuff. You mentioned earlier those lists of cities in Judah's territory,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the ones that seem kind of tedious.
Yeah.
Is there more to them than meets the eye? Could they actually hold some clues about how Judah tackled these challenges?
Absolutely. Those lists are like hidden treasure. They offer amazing insights into how power was structured, how people adapted to their circumstances. We just need to know where to look.
Well, let's dig in then. What can we uncover from those lists? What secrets are they hiding?
Well, let's take a closer look and see what we can find.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into these lists of cities. You know, the ones that detail Judah's inheritance.
All right, let's see what we can uncover.
You mentioned they might have some hidden clues about how Judah managed their territory. It's like those hidden object games.
Exactly. You got to look closely to find the good stuff.
So what can we learn about their approach to managing this vast and diverse land?
Well, one thing that jumps out is how the list is organized. It's not random, it's grouped by region.
So like lowlands, hill country, Negev.
Right. Each region with its own unique set of challenges and advantages.
So they weren't just treating it all as one big lump of land. They recognized those differences.
They did. It suggests a level of, well, administrative sophistication that's pretty impressive for a newly formed nation.
Yeah, I mean, they were developing systems to manage all these different settlements, resources, even populations.
Exactly, like urban planning in ancient times.
It's like, I don't know, modern day zoning laws.
Yeah.
Different areas designated for different uses.
Good comparison. Residential, commercial, industrial, it's about creating order, making things efficient.
Makes sense. So we see the regional divisions. What else can we learn?
Well, look at some of the cities mentioned, like Ekron and Gaza.
Philistine territory, right?
Exactly. And even though they were within Judah's territory, they weren't fully under their control.
So even with these detailed lists, it shows that Judah's control wasn't absolute, like having a map with blank spots.
A good way to put it, it's a reminder that consolidating power, creating a unified nation, it's never a simple process.
There's always more going on beneath the surface.
Always. It makes you appreciate how much work went into settling the Promised Land.
It wasn't just a quick conquest and everyone lived happily ever after.
Not even close. It was a gradual process, asserting control, integrating different populations, building a society from the ground up.
A long-term project.
It makes you think about Aksa again. Caleb's daughter.
Ah, yes. Our savvy negotiator, requesting those springs of water.
In a context where resources were so scarce, control over land was constantly challenged. Her actions, they show a real understanding of how to thrive.
She wasn't just sitting back, waiting to see what happened. She was shaping her own future.
Exactly, securing those vital resources for her family.
And it reminds us that even in those times, women found ways to make their voices heard.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from our deep dive today. This isn't just about memorizing names and dates. It's about understanding the human story behind it all.
The motivations, the challenges, the compromises, the things that really shaped the course of events.
And even though these events happened thousands of years ago, the themes are still relevant today. Power, identity, land, resources, these things still matter.
They do. So as we wrap things up, is there one final question you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something to ponder.
I think a good question is this. We've mainly focused on the Israelites, right? Their perspective on conquering and dividing the land. But what about the people who are already living there? What was it like for them? And what happened to them in the long run?
That's a great point. History is never just one side of the story.
Exactly. And often it's the voices of those who were marginalized, the ones who were conquered, that we need to listen to most carefully.
Well said. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive for today.
It's been a fascinating journey.
Thanks for joining us. And remember, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.